What if the man you put in handcuffs was the same man who once saved a U.S. general from certain death? What if a sweet tea, a folded newspaper, and a quiet request to lower your voice became the spark that ignited a national reckoning? This isn't fiction. It happened in Selma, Alabama, to an 82-year-old forgotten hero named Ezekiel Monroe, wrongly accused, publicly humiliated, silently erased by the very country he once risked his life for. Until a four-star general walked into the courtroom and everything changed. This is the story of how lies unraveled, how justice found its voice, and how a booth in a small-town diner became a monument to memory. If you believe forgotten veterans deserve more than apologies, if you think truth should never stay buried, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay until the very end, because what you're about to hear might restore your faith in something deeper. And it all begins with one sip of tea. The sun had just begun to rise over Selma, Alabama. The golden light spilled across the brick buildings, quiet streets, and faded murals of civil rights legends painted decades ago. It was a town steeped in history. But this morning, that history was about to repeat itself in the most unexpected way. At the corner of Mulberry and Fifth, tucked between an old hardware store and a gospel bookstore, sat Lila's Southern Kitchen, the kind of place where waitresses still called you baby and the biscuits came out warm before your coffee hit the table. At booth 3, near the window, sat a man who had become part of the furniture. Ezekiel Monroe, but most folks just called him Zeke. 82 years old, sharp as a tack, soft-spoken with eyes that had seen war, peace, and everything in between. Every morning without fail, Zeke came in at 6 a.m., ordered sweet tea, not coffee, too bitter for an old soul, he used to say, and read the Montgomery Times while greeting familiar faces. Most knew him as the retired custodian from Booker T. High. Some knew he used to help students with history essays and spelling bees. Almost none knew the truth. That decades ago, he'd carried a wounded commander through sniper fire in the freezing mountains of Korea. That he'd once stared down death, not for glory, not for medals, but for the man next to him. That part of him was long buried, folded away with an old uniform and a cedar chest back home. But history, like the morning sun, has a way of finding cracks to shine through. It was 6:42 a.m. when Preston and Wyatt Langford walked in. Two teenage brothers, blonde, prep school perfect. Their father owned half of downtown Selma, and their mother ran the Beautify Alabama committee like a one-woman army. They weren't regulars at Lila's, but when you're raised thinking the world belongs to you, every space becomes yours by default. They walked in laughing too loudly, still buzzed from whatever party they'd stumbled, out of wearing designer joggers, and the kind of smirks you only wear when you've never been told no. They took the booth next to Zeke's, didn't even look his way, until Wyatt made a joke, something about dinosaurs still reading newspapers. Then Preston chimed in louder. Looks like Selma's got its own Morgan Freeman. Laughter, not clever, not funny, just cruel. Zeke didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't say a word. He simply folded his paper and took a sip of his tea. But silence, to boys like them, feels like defiance. Preston leaned over, voice sharp and performative. You. Hear me, old man. Zeke looked up, steady, calm. Morning, gentlemen, he said softly. Some of us are just trying to enjoy the quiet. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even stern. But it challenged their performance, and they didn't like that. Wyatt pulled out his phone, started recording. He's being aggressive, Wyatt said to the camera. This old guy just threatened us, Preston added. Said he fought in wars and knows how to make people disappear. It was all lies, fabricated on the spot. But in a country still struggling with the weight of its past, lies told by wealthy white teens travel faster than the truth. Spoken by an old black man. The police arrived in under 7 minutes. 3 squad cars, lights flashing, doors slamming. Zeke remained seated the whole time. Didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't resist. The first officer on the scene, Deputy Kyle Mercer drew his weapon before he even asked for a name. Wyatt pointed theatrically. That's him. He threatened us. Zeke lifted his hands slowly. I haven't done anything, he said. I'm just trying to drink my tea. Mercer didn't listen, didn't ask for context, didn't check the camera footage from Lila's, footage that would later mysteriously disappear. He pulled Zeke up roughly, twisted his arms behind his back. The cuffs clicked loud, too loud, like a verdict before a trial. Let the record show, Mercer muttered into his radio. Potential threat subdued. Outside, a few early commuters paused, staring in disbelief as a man old enough to be their grandfather was shoved into the back of a cruiser. Inside, Lila, owner of the diner, stood frozen behind the counter, her hand trembling over the coffee. She wanted to scream, wanted to tell them who Zeke really was. But history had taught her the price of speaking too soon. The newspaper Zeke had been reading lay open on the table. The headline read, "Veterans Honored at State Capitol." And under it, a photo of a younger Ezekiel Monroe from decades ago shaking hands with a governor long gone. But that paper wouldn't matter now, because the narrative had already begun, and no one, at least not yet, was asking for the truth. Only one question echoed in the quiet of the diner. How do you erase a hero in less than 10 minutes? And outside, sirens screamed away down Mulberry Street, as Selma's most forgotten soldier disappeared behind bars once again. But what no one knew, what not even Zeke could have imagined, was that someone was watching from 600 miles away, and that man still owed Ezekiel Monroe a life, his own, and he was about to collect that debt in the most unexpected way. They called it an arraignment, but to Ezekiel Monroe it felt more like a ritual, a ceremony where truth was stripped down to paperwork. He sat in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front of him, facing a judge he'd never seen before. His name was Judge Raymond Ellis. Late 50s white, wore his black robe like a badge of detachment. He didn't look at Zeke when reading the charges: criminal threat, disorderly conduct, endangerment, words that felt like they belonged to someone else, someone dangerous, not a man who still carried church peppermints in his pocket. Zeke's lawyer, a young woman no older than his granddaughter, sat beside him, flipping through a file barely thicker than a church bulletin. Her name was Jasmine Kane, fresh out of law school. Bright-eyed, burnt-out, overworked, and outgunned. She leaned in, whispered, "Mr. Monroe, the judge wants to move this to trial in 3 weeks." "That's fast," Zeke replied. She nodded. "But this is Selma. Everything here moves fast if you're the wrong color in the wrong story." Zeke blinked slowly. He didn't need her to explain. He'd lived through fast justice before. He'd seen what it looked like when juries moved quicker than facts, and lawyers didn't have time to learn the truth. Outside the courthouse, the story had already gone viral. Local news stations led with the headline, "Elderly Man Allegedly Threatens Teens at Local Diner." The footage was grainy, shaky, recorded. From Preston Langford's phone, it showed Zeke turning his head, saying something. Then a quick cut, Wyatt screaming, "He's got PTSD." The rest was editing, spin dots storytelling with a motive. The Langfords had money, old money, cotton plantation legacy money. Their father, Charles Langford III, was a major donor to Judge Ellis's last campaign, and the DA, Tanner Graves, had been his fraternity brother at Auburn. None of that was in the case file, but in Selma, you didn't need it to be. Everyone already knew. What no one seemed to care about was Zeke's history, not the military commendations, not the medal ceremony in 1973, not the years spent teaching GED night classes to kids no one else believed in, not the photo of him at the Edmund Pettus Bridge during the March for Voting Rights. All of that had vanished, replaced by a label that required no nuance. Threat. Jasmine Kane stood to address the court. "Your Honor," she began, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "My client has no criminal history. He served in the U.S. Army, honorably discharged. He's 82. This seems like..." Judge Ellis raised a hand. "Ms. Kane will address that at trial. But, Your Honor, the prosecution is basing this on statements from 2 intoxicated minors. with a documented history of disciplinary issues. "The Langford boys come from a respected family," the judge snapped. And just like that, the Unair left the room. Zeke could have laughed. If it didn't feel so familiar, he'd heard that line before. Back in '62, when a cousin got arrested for asking to try on a jacket in a whites-only store. Back in '84, when a coworker was fired for talking back to a supervisor. And now, in 2023, it echoed still. "Respected family." Jasmine sat down hard, her hands clenched. She whispered, "They're railroading you, Mr. Monroe." Zeke nodded. "I know." He didn't say it out of fear or even frustration, just recognition. There was a rhythm to this, a process, and he'd seen it play out too many times not to understand how it worked. That night, back in the jail cell, Zeke sat alone, no roommate, just concrete, dim light and silence. But he wasn't alone in the bigger sense. Because across town, in her cluttered office above the Civil Rights History Museum, his niece Amara Monroe was already printing out case files. She had the story from Lila. She had the names. She had the drive. And she had 24,000 followers on her social justice page. "Stand with Zeke" was posted by midnight. Within hours, it was trending regionally. Veterans started commenting. Churches shared the link. Even a few old civil rights lawyers took notice. But justice wasn't social media, and the courtroom didn't refresh like a news feed. Zeke's trial was set. 3 weeks. 12 jurors would be picked from a pool drawn from areas like Summit Heights and Riverwood, places with gated communities and private school buses. Jasmine Kane requested a change of venue. Denied. She filed a motion to introduce Zeke's military and community service. Also denied. The judge ruled it as non-material to the case at hand. And so, a war hero's decades of honor were officially deemed irrelevant. Zeke sat in court every day, quiet, steady. They called him stoic. They didn't know it was just discipline, the kind you learn in foxholes, the kind that doesn't rattle when people lie about you. Because when you've stared down enemy fire, courtroom feels small, but that didn't mean he wasn't scared, only that he knew fear couldn't stop truth. It could only delay it, and somewhere deep down he felt something stirring, like distant thunder, or maybe memory. Because this wasn't the first time he'd been surrounded and outnumbered, and it wouldn't be the first time someone unexpected showed up when it mattered most. He just didn't know how close that someone already was, or that the truth about what happened in 1952 was about to come roaring back, louder than every lie trying to bury him. The walls of Red Hollow Correctional Facility didn't echo. They swallowed sound, just like they swallowed names, stories, and sometimes entire lives. Ezekiel Monroe walked in with his back straight and his eyes level. No fear, no defiance, just the weight of experience carried in silence. The intake guard looked him over. 82? The man scoffed. What did you do? Lecture someone to death? Zeke didn't answer. He'd learned long ago that not every question deserves a reply. His cell was on the second tier. Small concrete walls painted in fading gray, a bunk, a toilet, and a rusted sink that wheezed every time it ran. His cellmate was a wiry 20-something named Leon Banks, face tattoo, mistrust in his eyes. Been inside since he was 16. When Zeke entered, Leon stood up fast, ready to assert dominance. But then Zeke spoke. Name's Ezekiel. You can call me Zeke. And just like that, Leon paused. Not because of the name, but because of the voice. It didn't sound like fear. It didn't sound like bravado. It sounded settled, like someone who'd already lived 3 lifetimes. You military? Leon asked after a beat. Zeke nodded once. Long time ago. That was all it took. In Red Hollow, respect wasn't just about strength. It was about surviving storms no one else saw. Word got around fast. The old guy in D206 was Army.Korean War. Got railroaded by some rich kids in Selma. Didn't whine. Didn't posture. Just moved like a man who knew who he was. By the second week, Zeke had become a fixture in the day room. He never played cards, didn't mess with politics or cliques, but he started helping guys read their legal paperwork, explaining what motion to suppress meant, how to navigate parole board interviews. Sometimes, he shared stories from books, not his own, Maya Angelou, Baldwin, Howard Zinn, and when a young inmate named Trey asked him why he wasn't angry all the time, Zeke just smiled. "Anger's a tool," he said. "Use it too often, it dulls. Use it right, it changes things." That stuck. Trey wrote it on the wall above his bunk. Zeke didn't know it, but he was changing more than minds. He was shifting something deeper. A culture of fear was slowly giving way to curiosity and resistance. Quiet resistance. He started a book circle in the rec room, got the chaplain to donate old paperbacks. By the 4th week, 12 men were attending regularly, reading, debating, asking questions the system never gave them space to ask. But outside those prison walls, his niece, Amara, was building something louder. Her Stand With Zeke campaign had reached Black Vets United, a national group for veterans denied recognition. She posted Zeke's story, along with a scan of his discharge papers and a grainy photo of him at age 23, standing beside a destroyed tank in Pusan. That post went viral in a matter of hours. Veterans from Arizona to New Jersey flooded the page with comments. "We see you, brother. They tried the same thing with my uncle. This is why we march again." Amara began collecting statements from men Zeke had served with. A few were still alive, some had faded memory. But one man, Thomas Doc Reyes, remembered everything. He had been a medic in Zeke's unit, now 91, living in Baton Rouge and sharp as ever. His call with Amara lasted 42 minutes. By the end, she had 3 names, a journal entry, and a date. February 14th, 1952. That was the day Zeke had reportedly carried 3 injured soldiers under heavy mortar fire, refusing to leave the field until every last man was accounted for. It had never been filed officially. The platoon commander had died the next day, but Doc had written it down and saved it. Amara digitized the entry and sent it to a historian at Tuskegee University, who forwarded it to the National Archives. Then, something unexpected happened. She received an encrypted email from a retired colonel named Halbrook. He said only one thing: "Your uncle's file isn't missing. It was buried." He included a redacted document showing that Zeke had once been nominated for the Distinguished Service Cross, but it was blocked by a superior officer who cited concerns about unit morale if a Negro soldier is highlighted. Amara sat frozen at her desk. It wasn't just injustice, it was erasure, and now she had proof. Back inside Red Hollow, Zeke didn't know the storm that was brewing in his name. He was sitting with Leon, helping him write a letter to his daughter. "You gotta show her who you are," Zeke said. Leon looked up. "You think she'll believe it?" Zeke smiled. "One day everyone sees the truth. They just need a reason to look." That night, as lights dimmed across the block, Zeke stared at the ceiling. He thought about Korea, the snow, the silence before the shelling. He thought about Doc Reyes, about the men he couldn't save. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself a sliver of hope, not for justice, but for something rarer, remembering. Because what they took from him wasn't just freedom. It was the right to be remembered as he truly was. But the tide was turning, and somewhere in Washington, a file was glowing under fluorescent light, waiting to be seen, waiting for a general who hadn't forgotten, and who had just picked up the phone. In a quiet office overlooking Arlington National Cemetery, a retired general stood staring at a photograph. It was black and white, faded around the edges, but the face was unmistakable. Even after 71 years, General Mateo LeBlanc had faced many battles, but nothing shook him like the photo on his desk. There, in a snow-covered trench in Korea, stood a young black soldier, eyes focused, rifle slung low, back straight. It was Ezekiel Monroe, the man who had once saved his life. It wasn't a story LeBlanc often shared. Too personal, too painful, too filled with guilt. But last night, a call from a Pentagon contact had changed everything. "Sir," the aide had said, "there's something you need to see. It's going viral." They sent him the link to Amara's post. The moment LeBlanc saw Zeke's face, he knew. That wasn't just a wrongly accused veteran. That was the corporal who had dragged him out of a fire zone on Hill 92, bleeding, half-conscious, and surrounded. Memories returned like a flash flood. The screams, the snow, the smell of burned earth. And Zeke's voice, steady through chaos. "I got you. Just stay awake." LeBlanc sat down heavily, heart pounding. He reached for a folder he hadn't opened in 20 years. Inside were field reports, old maps, and one slip of paper signed by Captain Emmett Doyle. A recommendation, handwritten, for gallantry beyond measure. That slip had once been part of a larger submission, a Medal of Honor package, filed in March 1952, lost by April. Buried, most likely, in the same way black valor often was back then. Still, LeBlanc had kept a copy. He had meant to do something, meant to follow up. But life happened. Promotions came, wars shifted, and Ezekiel Monroe faded into memory. Until now. LeBlanc didn't hesitate. He made 2 calls. The first, to the National Personnel Records Center, requesting declassification of Monroe's entire file. The second, to Colonel Patricia Stokes, now working with the Department of Defense on racial disparities in historical awards. "We need to talk," he said. By sunrise, he was boarding a private jet bound for Alabama. On his lap, a leather binder marked confidential, unreviewed award nomination. Beside him, a copy of the 1952 Soul Times article that never made it to print. Headline: Negro Soldier Rescues Wounded Officer Under. Heavy fire, suppressed before publication. Too disruptive, they'd said. By the time the plane landed in Montgomery, news of LeBlanc's movement had leaked. Veteran forums lit up. Tweets read, "4-star general heading to Selma prison. Who is Ezekiel? Monroe?" Speculation exploded. But General LeBlanc wasn't after press. He was after penance. When he arrived at Amara Monroe's office, she was still in shock. "You're him," she said. "The one he saved." He nodded, his voice low. "He never told you," Amara shook her head. "He never bragged, never even mentioned a name." LeBlanc exhaled. "He saved not just me, but my entire unit. 47 men walked off that hill because of him, and for 70 years I've lived with the shame of knowing we left him behind." He opened the binder, let her read it. She blinked back tears as her hands trembled over the brittle paper. This proves everything," LeBlanc nodded. "It's time the world knows who Ezekiel Monroe really is." But there was more. A third call had come through. From the Library of Congress Military Archives, they had located a microfilm reel, deemed misfiled. It included recorded radio transmissions from Hill 92. Zeke's voice could be heard. Calm, precise. Calling for air support while enemy shells rained down. Hold coordinates. Don't move the line. I've still got 3 men down. It wasn't just heroic, it was surgical, professional, and it flew in the face of everything the prosecutor in Selma had claimed. LeBlanc and Amara submitted an emergency evidentiary motion that same night. Included were scanned statements, audio logs, and a formal affidavit from the general himself. The Selma courthouse had never seen such a file. Judge Ellis had no choice but to schedule a special hearing. Zeke's legal team was expanded overnight. Amara brought in attorney Wallace Griffin, a decorated civil rights litigator. The courtroom was already surrounded by reporters when word broke that a general would testify on behalf of a prisoner, that a Medal of Honor recommendation had been hidden, that the kids who'd lied were now lawyering up themselves. Inside Red Hollow, the warden received a call. Zeke was to be prepped for transfer, not to a different prison, but to court, and not just for trial, but for truth. The next morning, as Zeke sat in his jumpsuit waiting for transport, the guard approached him differently, respectfully. "You've got company, sir," he said. And when Zeke looked up, he saw a man in full uniform walk through the gate, General Mateo LeBlanc. older now. Silver hair, same eyes. They locked gazes for a moment. Then LeBlanc stepped forward, extended a hand. "Corporal Monroe," he said quietly. "It's time the country. Here's what you did." Zeke blinked. For a second, the years melted. He was 23 again, holding a rifle in snow up to his knees. And now, finally, someone had remembered. Not just the man, but the medal and the moment. The war wasn't over, but reinforcements had arrived. It was a Tuesday morning, but it felt like history had arrived early. The Selma County Courthouse hadn't seen a line like this in decades. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder with veterans in full dress. High school students skipped class just to catch a glimpse. And at the heart of it all, an old man in shackles and a general in full uniform. Ezekiel Monroe entered through the side door, escorted but no longer bowed. His head was high, his walk steady. His eyes scanned the room with quiet certainty. This was no longer just a hearing, it was a reckoning. At 9:03 a.m., Judge Raymond Ellis took his seat. He looked older, or maybe just smaller. The courtroom fell silent. Then came the moment. The back doors opened. In stepped General Mateo LeBlanc, four-star insignia gleaming beneath the morning light. He didn't speak at first. Didn't need to. The air shifted. Even the judge leaned forward. Hands clasped tighter than usual. LeBlanc approached the witness stand, swore in under oath, then paused, glancing once toward Zeke. "My name is General Mateo LeBlanc, retired. I am here to correct a record 71 years overdue." Opened the leather binder, the one marked confidential. Page by page, he unfolded a truth that had been buried in bureaucracy and bias. "This man," he said, pointing to Zeke, "saved my life. February 14th, 1952, Hill 92. Enemy shells had us pinned. We had no way out. Corporal Monroe carried me, bleeding, for over a mile under fire. He went back, twice, for 2 more soldiers." LeBlanc's voice cracked, not from weakness, but reverence. "I submitted a Medal of Honor recommendation," he said. "It never reached the Pentagon, suppressed by a superior officer who claimed, and I quote, 'The Army isn't ready to see a Negro soldier as a national hero.'" Gasps rippled across the room. Cameras clicked, pens froze. LeBlanc continued, "I have here that officer's statement. Declassified, signed, dated." He handed it to the bailiff. Judge Ellis adjusted his glasses, reading the scanned memo on the overhead screen. The courtroom was silent, dead silent. LeBlanc wasn't done. He played the archived audio transmission. From Hill 92, Zeke's voice filled the chamber. Calm, precise, hold fire. Still got 3 down. Going back in. Another pause. "Tell my mama I'll be home, but not until they are." Someone in the back started crying. Not loud, but real. Jasmine Kane, Zeke's original lawyer, wiped her eyes, barely holding it together, and then it happened. The prosecution stood. D.A. Tanner Graves, face pale, his voice weak. "Your Honor, in light of these revelations, the state moves to withdraw all charges against Mr. Monroe with prejudice." The room exploded. Veterans stood up in unison. Reporters sprinted out to break the headline. Judge Ellis banged his gavel, but his voice trembled. Motion granted. He looked to Zeke, and for once he didn't sound like a judge. He sounded like a man. "Mr. Monroe, this court owes you more than it can repay." Zeke didn't answer right away. He stood slowly, turned to the crowd. He didn't raise a fist, didn't smile, he just nodded once. Quiet, deliberate, dignified. Outside, thousands had gathered. Bikers from Rolling Thunder, VFW chapters from 5. States. Local kids holding signs. "We believe Zeke and justice has a name." When he stepped through the courthouse doors, the crowd roared. But Zeke paused, looked up at the sky, as if speaking to someone unseen. Maybe his mother, maybe the men he'd saved, maybe the ones he hadn't. Then General LeBlanc walked out beside him, and the two stood side by side, one in stars, one in strength. And for the first time in 71 years, Truth had a microphone, justice had a stage, and America, just for a moment, remembered what a real hero looked like. The chains were gone, but the weight of 71 years didn't lift so easily. Ezekiel Monroe walked out of the Selma County Courthouse a free man, but freedom looked different now. It didn't come with parades or apologies. It came with questions and scars. The headlines came fast. Veteran exonerated after general testifies to hidden heroism. Alabama hero wrongly imprisoned. Truth uncovered after 7 decades. Everyone wanted a quote, a soundbite, a headline, but Zeke gave them none. He didn't want to be a symbol. He wanted to breathe, to sit under a tree, to hear quiet again. The mayor offered him the key to the city. Zeke declined. The governor sent a letter of regret. Zeke never opened it. He didn't need words. He needed action. At home, Amara had turned her apartment into a makeshift command center. Stacks of folders, stacks of letters, hundreds of messages from families across the country. All with one thing in common. My father went through the same thing. My uncle's story was buried too. We didn't even know until it was too late. So Zeke did something unexpected. He took the settlement money, over $5 million, and he gave it away, almost all of it. He founded the Forgotten Soldier Project, a legal and historical initiative to help wrongfully convicted veterans clear their records and help families rediscover stories erased by time and prejudice. "I don't want statues," he said at the opening ceremony. "I want truth." He hired Amara as executive director, brought on historians, lawyers, archivists. Within 3 months, they reopened 41 cold cases involving veterans, most of them Black or Latino men who'd served honorably and been dishonored by the same system they once protected. Zeke didn't give speeches, but he met every family, listened, held their hands, and told them what no one had told him for 70 years. You're not invisible. Meanwhile, the state of Alabama faced pressure like never before. Judge Raymond Ellis quietly announced his early retirement. District Attorney Tanner Graves issued a public apology, but few accepted it. And the Langford brothers? They disappeared from the public eye. Their family's real estate empire faced lawsuits, protest boycotts, and a class action investigation for housing discrimination. But Zeke never mentioned them again. He didn't need to. They were footnotes. He was the narrative. 6 months after his exoneration, the White House called. The president personally invited Zeke to Washington, D.C. Not for politics, but for something more sacred. In a private ceremony at the Oval Office, President Martinez placed a ribbon around Zeke's neck. It held the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military distinction, a recognition that should have happened in 1952. It happened now, and Zeke accepted it for the men who didn't get theirs. Doc Reyes was there, so was General LeBlanc, and Amara holding back tears. "I don't accept this for me," Zeke said softly into the microphone. "I accept this for the ones who carried me, even when they couldn't speak my name." He paused, then added, "You don't fix history with medals, but sometimes you can write the next chapter right." Back in Selma, the city council renamed the old library on Main Street. It's now called the Ezekiel Monroe Center for Truth and Honor. Kids visit on field trips, read his letters, listen to recordings of his war stories and civil rights marches. Every Juneteenth, Zeke speaks to young people there, not about war, but about dignity and memory. He tells them, you don't have to wear a uniform to serve your country. You just have to tell the truth, loud enough, long enough, until someone listens. The man who was once called a threat was now being studied in history textbooks. Veterans across the nation wore pins in his honor. Even Congress passed legislation, the Veteran Justice Act, pushed forward by Amara's campaign. It mandated review boards for veterans convicted without proper legal defense. It was the first law in U.S. history named after a wrongly imprisoned soldier. But even in celebration, Zeke remained humble. He still walked every morning, still ordered sweet tea, no lemon, still left a folded newspaper on the table. Some days strangers would stop him, say thank you, Zeke would smile, but he always replied the same. Don't thank me, just remember. Because for Ezekiel Monroe, freedom didn't begin when the cell door opened. It began the moment someone cared enough to ask, what really happened? The booth at Lila's Southern Kitchen never changed. It still sat by the window, facing the street, bathed in morning light. It was cleaned daily, wiped down, polished, but no one ever sat there. Not anymore. Not since Ezekiel Monroe came home. Not since his truth became the town's memory. Lila, the owner, had a small brass plaque installed above the table. It read, "Reserved in honor of Corporal Ezekiel Monroe, hero, teacher, neighbor." Below that, a line in cursive. The truth takes time, but it always arrives. The staff didn't speak much about it. They didn't need to. Every regular knew the story, and every tourist asked the same question. Is that the booth? Kids pointed. Mothers hushed them softly, and old men tipped their hats. Lila kept a journal beneath the table, hidden behind the sugar caddy. Visitors left notes inside. Thank yous. Prayers. Questions. One child wrote, "When I grow up, I want to be like Mr. Zeke." Another wrote, "My grandpa served too. I never asked him anything, but I will now." On the wall above the booth, a framed photo of Zeke in uniform. Next to it, a second photo, taken the day he walked out of court beside General LeBlanc. In both images, his posture was the same, straight, still, like a monument in motion. Once a month, Amara brought students from the local high school. She called it Memory Hour. They'd sit in silence at nearby booths, read aloud letters Zeke wrote during the Korean War, discuss the meaning of service in a country still learning how to treat its heroes. Some students cried, some asked hard questions. One girl raised her hand and asked, why didn't they believe him in the first place? Amara didn't flinch. She said, because believing him meant confronting a truth they didn't want to see. And truth is hard. The girl nodded slowly and wrote Zeke's name on the back of her notebook, in cursive, with stars. By years, and the booth at Lila's had become more than a seat. It became a classroom, a confession box, a tiny museum of justice. One day, Zeke walked in quietly, alone. No cameras, no guards, just a hat pulled low and a newspaper under one arm. Lila saw him and gasped, "Zeke, you don't have to." But he held up a hand, smiling. "I'm not here for ceremony. I'm just here for tea." He sat down gently, placed the newspaper to the side, ran a hand across the table, and let out a breath. Long, heavy, soft. People noticed, of course, but no one interrupted. Even the chatter died down. It was as if the town itself understood the moment. When his tea arrived, he looked out the window, the same street he'd once been driven down in cuffs. Now calm, now still. Outside, a boy on a bicycle rode past holding a backpack with a forgotten soldier project patch. Zeke smiled. He turned to Lila. "I ever tell you why I sit here?" She shook her head. "I like to face the light," he said. "That way, when people lie, I can still see their eyes." She didn't say a word, just placed her hand on his shoulder, warm, steady. The booth never held another guest after that. Not really. People came, took photos, left flowers, wrote in the journal. But no one filled the space the way Zeke had, because he didn't just sit there, he anchored it. He turned it into something sacred. And long after he was gone, that booth remained untouched, a silent witness, a gentle reminder that even in the smallest corner of the quietest town, history waits to be noticed, justice waits to be claimed, and heroes sometimes sip tea before sunrise, waiting for someone to finally ask, what really happened? Ezekiel Monroe never asked to be famous. He didn't seek revenge, he didn't shout, he remembered. And in doing so, he reminded all of us what honor really looks like. Not in medals, but in mercy. Not in speeches, but in stillness. He taught us that justice doesn't arrive with sirens. It walks in slowly, one step, One story, one booth at a time. If this story moved you, share it. Not for views, but for the countless other veterans still waiting to be seen, still waiting to be believed, still waiting for someone to ask, what really happened to you? And if no one else tells their story, maybe you will. Subscribe to this channel for more untold truths, because when history forgets, we remember always.